"Daddy, it hurts!" Sophie screamed as Karen drove the nail straight through her palm and into the wheelchair ramp. The sadistic smile of the HOA vice president vanished when Sheriff Matthews jumped in badge in hand. "You just assaulted the wrong child," he told her, voice cold calm. "Mine?" To see full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more Karen stories. I still remember the scream. It ripped through our quiet neighborhood like a tornado siren, but it wasn't warning of an approaching tempest. It was my daughter, Sophie's cry of pain. I was driving into our street just after completing a long shift when I heard it. That sound will forever be etched in my mind. I left my unmarked county car in the road and ran towards our small one-story house. The sight that met me sent chills through the blood in my veins. My 15-year-old daughter, Sophie, was against the new wooden wheelchair ramp I had constructed last weekend. Karen Whitfield, the hawk-faced HOA vice president, stood over her, wielding a hammer in one hand, her face twisted in a nasty grimace, as she drove a long nail through my daughter's outstretched palm into the wooden railing. "This will teach you that rules apply to everyone," Karen sneered, her perfectly highlighted blonde hair swinging as she leaned closer to my daughter. "No unauthorized structures in Meadowbrook Estates, even for attention-seeking brats. Faking that, they can't walk." Two other members of the HOA board, Richard and Patricia, stood by watching in horror, clearly not having expected Karen's enforcement to take the form of violence. Sophie's wheelchair had been knocked aside, leaving her leaning on the ramp using her good hand, while the other was now pinned to the wood by the nail Karen had driven straight through it. "Help!" Sophie screamed, tears running down her face. "Please, I can't move." Blood oozing around the point of entry, drizzling onto new lumber. I had gone to the trouble of measuring and installing so Sophie could have independence after the accident a year ago that had paralyzed her legs. Karen's insistently proposed accident, the one that was opportunistic timing to get special treatment. "Stop!" I roared, finding my voice as paternal rage surged through me. Karen turned the hammer still raised for what appeared to be a second nail in her other hand. "Oh, look, Daddy's home," she sneered. "Your little princess here thought her disability gave her special rights to violate our community standards." I approached slowly, hands visible, using every ounce of my law enforcement training to control the fury threatening to explode. I wasn't wearing my uniform. I never did in the neighborhood. We'd moved here for a fresh start after Sophie's accident, and I'd wanted to be just a dad, not the sheriff. Remove that nail from my daughter's hand now. My voice was deadly calm. Karen crossed her arms, hammer still clutched in her manicured fingers. "This ramp wasn't approved by the architectural committee. We sent 3 violation notices, which I responded to with the ADA paperwork," I said, moving closer, positioning myself between Sophie and this monster. "Federal law guarantees her right to accessibility. Federal law doesn't trump HOA covenants," Karen snapped. "This is decreases property values. If she needs special accommodation, you should have bought in a different neighborhood." Sophie whimpered behind me, unable to free herself without tearing her hand further. I could hear the other board members murmuring uncertainly. "Richard," I said, without taking my eyes off Karen, "there's a first aid kit in my car. Patricia, call 911. "Don't you dare," Karen barked at them. "We're conducting official HOA business." That's when I reached inside my jacket and pulled out my badge. "Sheriff Daniel Matthews, Pinarest County. You are assaulting a minor. Step away from my daughter now." The color drained from Karen's face. "You're the sheriff, yes, and you've just committed felony assault on a disabled minor on camera." I nodded toward the security cameras I'd installed after the first threatening HOA letter had appeared on our door. Richard and Patricia backed away immediately. Karen stood her ground for a moment before dropping the hammer and second nail. "This is ridiculous." She was interfering with our removal of an unauthorized structure. "It was an accident." "An accident?" I moved to Sophie, examining the nail driven clean through her palm and into the wooden railing. "You deliberately hammered this through my daughter's hand while calling her an attention-seeking brat." "That's not an accident, Karen. That's aggravated assault with a deadly weapon." The wail of sirens approached as I carefully supported Sophie, trying to keep her hand immobile until paramedics could properly remove the nail. Her face was pale from shock and pain. "Daddy," she whispered. She said, "I was faking that. If I really tried, I could walk." Judy Ramirez was first on scene, his eyes widening as he took in the situation. "Sheriff, what the hell happened?" "Karen Whitfield assaulted my daughter. I need you to take her into custody while I accompany Sophie to the hospital." My voice was professional, but inside I was barely containing my rage. "This is outrageous," Karen shrieked as Ramirez approached with handcuffs. "Do you know who my husband is? He's the mayor's golf partner. And my daughter is a disabled teenager you just crucified to a piece of wood." I replied evenly. "Guess which one I care about?" Sophie, documenting everything for evidence. The nail had missed major tendons and arteries, small mercies. As they loaded her into the ambulance, I turned to find half the neighborhood had gathered to witness Karen being placed in a patrol car. "This isn't over, Matthews," she called out. "You'll regret moving to Meadowbrook." I simply held held her gaze as I climbed into the ambulance beside my daughter. No, Karen. You'll regret the day you laid hands on my child at the hospital. The doctor who treated Sophie's wound looked physically ill when I explained what had happened. 16 years in emergency medicine, and I've never. He shook his head while carefully cleaning the wound. 7 stitches on each side. She'll need physical therapy, but there shouldn't be permanent damage to function. Sophie remained quiet through the procedure, her brave face breaking only when the nurse stepped out. Why does she hate me so much, Dad? She asked, her voice small. I never did anything to her. I held her good hand, struggling to explain the ugliness of people like Karen. Some people can't stand anyone who's different. They're so afraid of their own weaknesses that they lash out at others who remind them life is fragile. She told me last week that people like me should stay hidden at home. Sophie's voice trembled, that my wheelchair makes people uncomfortable. Something broke inside me hearing those words. I'd spent my career upholding the law, believing in the system, but now the system seemed woefully inadequate for the crime committed against my child. The next morning, after bringing Sophie home and getting her settled, I went to my office in full uniform. The deputies fell silent as I walked in. News travels fast in small towns. On my desk sat the preliminary report about Karen Whitfield. She was released on bail at 2 a.m. Deputy Ramirez informed me her husband called Judge Wilson directly. Of course, the Whitfields were old money in Pinehurst County. Karen's husband owned half the commercial real estate downtown, and they hosted fundraisers for every important political campaign. The DA wants to talk to you. Ramirez added something about exploring all options. I knew what that meant. They wanted to offer Karen a plea deal, probably community service, and a fine, no jail time, no felony record. Over the next week, my suspicions were confirmed. The DA called it a regrettable incident, but questioned whether we could prove intent. Karen was claiming Sophie had accidentally fallen onto the nail while she was legally removing an unauthorized structure. Richard and Patricia, who had witnessed everything, suddenly couldn't remember exactly what they'd seen. My security camera footage showed the assault, but conveniently had no audio to capture Karen's words. Meanwhile, Sophie was struggling. The physical pain was manageable with medication, but the emotional trauma ran deeper. She refused to leave the house, jumping at every sound, terrified Karen would return. Nightmares woke her screaming, her hand clutching at phantom nails, and the HOA hadn't stopped. Every day brought new violation notices. Our grass was 1/4 inch too high. Our mailbox was the wrong shade of black. The flowers I planted to cheer Sophie were non-approved species. I played by the rules, filed complaints through proper channels, documented everything, trusted the system. I dedicated my life to upholding. But when the DA called to say they were reducing charges to misdemeanor, simple assault with a recommendation for anger management classes, something inside me shifted. If the system wouldn't protect my daughter, I would. I began by pulling Karen's file. 27 complaints against her in 5 years. All dismissed allegations of racism, ableism, and physical intimidation buried by her husband's influence. 3 families had moved away after confrontations with her. One elderly man had even suffered a heart attack after she'd blocked his driveway with her SUV during a dispute over his medical alert system antenna. Next, I examined HOA financial records, which as sheriff I could access under the guise of investigating possible fraud. What I found was illuminating over $300,000 in HOA funds spent on special projects with no documentation, contracts awarded to companies owned by Karen's relatives, selective enforcement of rules against households Karen personally disliked. But most interesting was the property survey I ordered. It revealed that the grand entrance to Karen's prized colonial-style home, her award-winning portico, encroached 6 inches onto county right-of-way. The same violation she'd accused multiple neighbors of over the years had resulted in forced removals of structures, including a Vietnam veteran's flagpole last year. I took my time building my case each day. Seeing Sophie struggle to use her injured hand strengthened my resolve when Karen strutted past our house daily to take photos of supposed violations. I smiled and waved, watching confusion replace her smug satisfaction. Exactly 1 month after the assault, I called an emergency. HOA meeting attendance was mandatory. I arrived in full uniform, with Sophie beside me in her wheelchair, her bandaged hand resting visibly on her lap. Karen sat at the center table presiding over the meeting. Her expression soured when she saw us, but she quickly recovered. Sheriff Matthews, while we appreciate your enthusiasm for community involvement, this meeting is for addressing violations, not personal grievances, actually. Karen, I replied, wheeling Sophie to the front. I'm here in my official capacity as county sheriff to address multiple felony violations committed by the Meadowbrook HOA board. The room fell silent. Deputy Garcia I called, and the doors opened as my deputies entered carrying boxes of documents. Please distribute the evidence packets. Each homeowner received a folder detailing Karen's financial misdeeds, selective enforcement, and legal violations. As they read, gasps and murmurs filled the room. Karen stood up, face flushed. This is harassment. My husband will. Your husband is currently being questioned by the FBI regarding wire fraud. I interrupted calmly. Those special projects you've been funding with HOA money, They trace back to shell companies owned by your family. I approached the table, placing a specific document before her. This is a county order for the immediate removal of your portico, which illegally encroaches on county property. You have 48 hours before it will be removed for you. The same courtesy you showed my daughter. You can't do this, she whispered. I can, and I have. You see, Karen, when you drove that nail through my daughter's hand, you didn't just assault a disabled girl. You attacked the daughter of the man who knows every law you've broken. I turned to address the stunned homeowners. As of today, the county has placed the Meadowbrook HOA under receivership pending criminal investigation. An emergency election for new board members will be held next week. Deputies will remain to answer your questions and take statements from anyone who has experienced similar treatment. As I wheeled Sophie toward the exit, Karen lunged forward, grabbing my arm. I will destroy you for this. I looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Remove your hand or I'll consider it assault on a law enforcement officer. She jerked back as if burned. The room had gone completely silent. Sophie looked up at Karen, her young face solemn. The doctor says, I might never regain full feeling in my hand. Every time I feel that numbness, I'll remember your face as you hammered that nail through my palm. Karen's composure finally cracked. It was an accident. I never meant. Save it for your trial. I interrupted where the security footage will be played for the jury with audio. Her face went white, but there was no audio on your cameras. I smiled for the first time in weeks. No, there wasn't on my home cameras, but my body cam was recording when I approached you. Department policy when responding to any incident, even off duty. It captured everything from the moment I exited my vehicle, including your statement about teaching my attention-seeking brat a lesson. As realization dawned on her face, I added, and unlike local charges that friends in high places can make disappear, federal hate crime charges against a disabled minor come with mandatory minimum sentences 5 years. Karen, no probation. In the weeks that followed, justice unfolded like a slow, satisfying wave. Karen's husband's empire crumbled under federal investigation. Their assets were frozen. The grand house with its illegal portico went into foreclosure. Karen herself denied bail on federal charges, awaited trial from a cell. The new HOA board, led by the Vietnam veteran whose flagpole Karen had removed, established Sophie as a special consultant on accessibility issues. The wheelchair ramp remained, soon joined by several others throughout the neighborhood, as elderly residents realized they could now age in place with proper accommodations. 6 months after that terrible day, Sophie rolled her wheelchair to the end of our ramp, where neighborhood children waited to accompany her to the park. The scar on her hand was still visible, but she no longer hid it. Dad, she said, looking up at me, do you think people can change? I watched and saw Richard and Patricia, who had finally mustered their courage and testified against Karen, wave hello across the street where they were helping another neighbor install a garden bench. Yes, I said, when good people stand up, everything can change. Sophie nodded, her fingers tracing the scar. Then it was worth it, not the pain, but standing up to her. Someone had to be first. As she rolled away with her friends, I thought of the nail that had been meant to pin her down, to tell her to stay in what Karen considered her rightful place. Instead, it had been the first crack in a wall of injustice, letting in light to a community that had lived too long in fear. Sometimes it takes one act of brutality to make clear the strength of those it was meant to break, and sometimes the hand that drives the nail never considers who might be holding the hammer of justice. When retribution is finally visited, or the paramedics worked carefully to free D.